Kangu and his young wife Amina had been married for only 6 months. Yet it already felt as if they've been searching for a place of their own forever. Since their wedding, they had squeezed into the back room of Amina's elder sister's house in Kinshasa, where privacy was a dream. And every evening came with arguments about electricity bills, shared buckets, and who should sweep the compound. Kangu, who worked as a junior clerk in a transport office, felt humiliated every time he returned from work to find his clothes folded on the same chair as his nephew's school uniforms. He often told Amina, "A man is not a man until he has his own roof, even if it is leaking." So when one of his friends told him about a 2-bedroom flat available in Matung district, Kaku's heart leapt for joy. He drank mina there on a hot Saturday afternoon. The building was not brand new, but it looked strong with high walls and a large gate. The compound was neat with 8 flats, arranged around a small compound, where a Tor sat working on a sewing machine. Compared to the chaos in his sister's-in-law's house, this house looked like paradise. The landlord, Mosio Kabaya, was a tall gray man in his late 50s. He wore an old shirt and had the type of face that looked as if it had seen many sorrows. When he opened the gate, he studied them for a minute before greeting them in French accented Lingala. "Bonjour, you must be here for the flats." "Yes," Papa replied eagerly. "We heard you are renting. We would like to see it." Kabaya left them to the flats. The paint on the walls were already fading. The floor tiles were cracked in some corners. But to Amina, who had spent months cooking in her sister's smoky backyard kitchen, it was beautiful. She ran her hand along the counter and whispered, "At last we can breathe." Kangu noticed the seriousness in the landlord's eyes as he explained the rules. "There are things I will not allow here. No loud parties, no pets, no strangers moving in without my permission." They both nodded quickly. "Yes, Papa, we agree." But then Kabaya stopped, cleared his throat, and said something that made Amina blink. "And absolutely no babies in this compound." For a moment they were all silent. Amina frowned, thinking she had misheard. "Excuse me, Papa. No babies." Kabaya's face hardened. "You heard me. Couples who want to bring children must look elsewhere." "Yeah, it is forbidden." Kaku let out a nervous laughter. Papa, maybe you mean no noise. We will keep our visitors quiet." But Kabaya shook his head firmly. "No babies. Not today, not tomorrow. If you cannot accept this, the flat is not for you." Amina turned to her husband in confusion. "Kangu, what does he mean? How can someone forbid children?" The Tor in the compound, Mama Solange, who had been listening from her sewing machine, whispered loudly, "That is how he is. He does not like babies. Don't even try toast kwai." Kangu, even though uncomfortable, was desperate. He looked at Amina with pleading eyes. "My wife, please, let's not lose this chance. We have searched for months. We need peace. Maybe it is only a small rule. Maybe he just hates noise," Amina whispered back sharply. But what if he cut her off gently? "Please, nah, just for now. It's only the 2 of us. Let's take it." Kabaya watched them closely. Then he nodded when Kangu finally said, "We agree, Papa. We'll keep to your rules." The landlord pulled out a rent agreement and pointed at the section with his long finger. "Sign here, and remember what I said, no babies." Kangu reluctantly signed their agreements, and as they stood holding the house keys in their hands, neighbors like Jonas, the taxi driver, and Madame Chancel der Carosella greeted them warmly. "Welcome. You are lucky this compound is peaceful, but remember, Kappa does not smile at nonsense." That night, as they lay on their mattress in their new flat, Amina whispered into the darkness, "Kangu, I don't like this rule. A home without children is not a home." Kangu pulled her clothes and murmured, "Don't worry, for now we are safe. When the time comes, no man will stop us from having our own child." For the first few months in the new flat, life felt almost perfect. Amina loved waking up without her sister banging on the door. She loved cooking without smoke choking her lungs, and she loved stretching out on their bed without nephews jumping on it. She kept the house spotless, such that even Mama Solange, the tailor in the compound, admired her. "Hey, Amina, your house is always shining. One would think you are expecting the president." Kakutu felt like a real man at last. Every evening, when he returned from work at the transport office, he whistled as he locked the gates. "This is my house," he would mutter proudly, even though the building belongs to Kabaya. To him, providing a roof was the first step towards respect. However, life had its way of surprising people, because on a rainy morning, Amina sat on the edge of the bed holding her stomach. When Kangu rushed in worried, she said in a low voice, "Kangu, I think I am carrying a child." At first, Kangu stood frozen. Then a huge grin spread across his face. "Amina, a child?" "Our child." He lifted her up and spun her around until she giggled. They prayed together that morning, thanking God for what they called the first fruit of their love. But by evening, reality sank in as Amina washed the plate. She looked at him with worried eyes. "Kangu, what about Kabaya's rule?" He said, "No babies. What if he finds out?" Kangu waved his hand dismissively. Forget that man. Does he think he can control the womb?" "We pay rent. We have rights to leave. Let him shout if he wants. I am a man. No one will stop me from having my child." Still, they both knew the landlord was not a man to play with. His eyes were sharp like a hawk, and he noticed the smallest things. If Amina gained even 1 kilo of weight, Kababaya would likely ask why. So from the very beginning, they built a plan. Amina began wearing large wrappers and loose dresses. Even when the heat in Kinshasa was unbearable when neighbors teased her, she laughed it off, saying she had been eating too much fufu. Mama Solange the tailor noticed and winked at her one afternoon. "Amina, are you sure you are just adding weight? You are glowing like someone who is carving." But Amina smiled nervously. "It's only food, Mama." Too much starch at night. When Kababia, the landlord, walked through the compound, she would hold a bowl or a bag in front of her stomach, pretending to be busy. She made sure never to sit idly outside, and whenever Kababaya called out to her, she avoided long conversations with him and disappeared into the flat immediately. But the neighbors were not blind for long. Gonas, the taxi driver, weddings suspiciously at Kangu. My friend, congratulations in advance. But be careful. That old man will not like it." Kangu pressed a finger to his lips. "Please, Jonas, do not see anything. It was between us." By the 6th month, this secret became harder to keep. Amina's step grew slower and her back ached. She stopped fetching water from the common tap because her belly was becoming obvious. So Bangu took over the chore every evening after work. When Mama Chansa, the akara seller, asked why Aminina no longer came to buy akara, Kaku lied smoothly. "She's staying indoors to learn online business." The clinic visits were done in disguise. Amina wrapped herself in layers of shells, and Kangu would hail a taxi far away from the compound so that no one saw them living together. One day, Amina was almost caught by the landlord when he saw her returning from the market carrying a big baby basket that could not fit into any bag for disguise. His eyes narrowed like a knife. "What is that you are holding?" he asked coldly. "Amina Standard. It is for my sister's child." Kaba stared at her belly, then at her face and muttered darkly, "Do not break my rule, Amina. I warned you both." Then he walked away stiffly. That night Amina broke down with tears. "Anku Heng knows he will throw us out." But Kanga hugged her tightly. "Let him try. He cannot stop us. Even if he brings soldiers, I will not abandon my family." Finally, the delivery day came that week. Amina pretended to travel to her mother's village, telling curious neighbors that she was going to visit family. They left at dawn when the gatekeeper was still dozing, and by midday, Amina was at the small clinic across town, where she gave birth to her baby little Enola after a long night of labor. However, for 2 weeks after the delivery, they stayed with Amina's mother, letting Amina recover and allowing the baby to gain strength back in the compound. Neighbors asked Kababia where the couple had gone, but he shrugged coldly. "I do not know, and I do not care as long as they return without trouble." When Kangu finally returned, he only carried a small bag. Amina came later with baby and wrapped tightly in aklo. The baby was so tiny and quiet that no one noticed at first. To make it less suspicious, Amina wore another huge wrapper and pretended she was sick from her travels. The neighbors, who already suspected, exchanged glances but said nothing. For a few weeks, they managed to keep peace. Amina tried to muffle Ini's cry, rocking her gently and pressing Ini's mouth to her breast quickly whenever she stared. At night, Kangu and Amina tried every trick to keep the baby hidden. When Ini cried, they pressed her gently to Aminina's chest and even stuffed blankets across the window to block the sound. Sometimes, Kangu even carried the baby outside in the dead of night, pacing the corridor quietly and praying the landlord would not suddenly appear. For weeks it worked. Kabaya remained unaware, or at least pretended not to notice. But babies cannot stay silent forever. One hot afternoon, his cry rang out too sharp and too loud, disturbing the silence of the compound like a trumpet. They tried all they could to stop her cries, but baby Ini was determined to cry. This particular night, suddenly a door opened, and the sound of heavy, deliberate, and angry footsteps came through. Kabaya banged on their door. Bang, bang, bang. Kangu jumped up in shock and opened the door slightly. The landlord pushed the door wide open and got in. His face washered and his eyes were fierce. "You think you can hide from me? I told you no babies allowed here. And yet look." He pointed at the crying bundle in Amina's arms. "You have broken my rule. You must leave this house at once." Amina hugged him protectively and cried, "Papa, please, this is our child. Where do you expect us to go in the middle of the night?" But Kababaya's voice turned. "I do not care. I gave my warning. No babies in my compound. Not now, not ever." The neighbors gathered, gossiping among themselves. Some looked at the couple with pity, while others shook their heads. What kind of man hates babies this much? And it was at that moment that Amina realized something chilling. This was not just about noise. Kabaya's hatred for babies was deep and strange. After that night of Tundor's banging and harsh words, the compound changed. It was as if Kababaya's bridge had left a shadow hanging in the compound. The neighbors still greeted Amina and Kangu, but their greetings carried questions they were afraid to ask. Mama Solange, who had once been quick with compliments, now spoke with fear. Jonas, the taxi driver who used to crack jokes loudly, would only nod and mutter, "Courage, my brother," before climbing into his old bouillon became their daily food. Amina hardly slept. She kept waking at the slightest sound, holding her baby clothes. She would whisper, "Kangu, what if he comes again? What if he tries to harm her?" But Kangu, even though his chest was heavy with fear, pretended to be calm. He would assure her, "Do not worry. He only backs, he will not bite. We pay rent. He cannot throw us out." Yet he knew the truth, which was that Kabaya was not a man of idle threats. His eyes seemed mysterious. Every evening when Kangu returned from work, he sometimes caught the landlord standing in the compound, staring silently at their window. Not shouting or banging, just standing there like a statue until Kangu greeted him nervously. Only then would Kabaya turn away. The neighbors who loved gossip almost as much as food began to share their own version of stories. One evening, as Amina washed clothes at the tap, Madame Chantal, their carousel, leaned close. "My daughter, you think this is the first time a baby has entered this compound? Let me tell you, you are not the first." Amina's hands froze in the soapy water. "What do you mean, Mama?" Madame Chantal looked around before continuing. "There was one family before you, and yet Seer and his wife. They had a baby, a sweet boy with cheeks like bread. But one night the child suddenly died. No sickness, no fever. He just slept and never woke up. The parents left before daylight crying. After that, Kapaya made his rule. No babies ever again." Amina felt her stomach twist. But are you saying Kabaya killed the baby?" Madame Shanta shook her head quickly. "I did not say that. Only God knows. But since then everyone fears. That is why he won before renting out his house." Later that week, Kangu approached Jonas carefully. "Brother, tell me the truth. What do you know about Kabaya's rule?" Jonas lowered his voice. My brother, you are stubborn. You were warned. That man has history. Long ago, even before another tenant had a child here. Same story. The baby died in the night. No sign of sickness. People say that the house is cursed, that Kabaya's wife died giving birth here, and her spirit still cries. Some say Kabaya made sacrifice. Others say he's only afraid of pain repeating. But one thing is sure, Babies do not last long in this compound. The word struck Kangu like stones. He entered his flat, restless, pacing the floor, while Amina breastfed in. He told her the stories, and she held the baby tighter as her eyes widened with fear. We cannot stay here. Kanu, we must leave before anything happens to her. But Kangu shook his head stubbornly. And go where? Do we have another house? Do we have money for new rent? No, we will stay and we will pray. Nothing will happen to our child. That night Willini cried. Amina heard footsteps outside their window. She peeped through the curtain and saw Kabaya standing there again. He stared up at their flat with a dull face under the moonlight. His lips moved as if he was saying something, but she could not hear the words. She closed the curtain quickly and trembled. Why does he watch us like that? She thought to herself. But in her heart, she knew this was not just about him not wanting babies. Something darker or something buried in sorrow tied Kabaya's soul to babies in the compound. Amina was confused and terrified since Kangu had refused to take them out of the compound. She resorted to doing what she knew best to keep the peace. She sang lullabies to cover baby in his cries, stuffed clothes against the windows to muffle the sound, and even tiptoed around the flat as if the landlord could hear every footstep. But babies are babies, so in his sharp and unrelenting voice would sometimes pierce through the compound at night, and each time the shadow of Kababaya would appear. Sometimes it was his fist pounding on the door. Other times it was just his figure standing in the compound, looking at their window and listening. Once Amina woke up at 3 a.m. and found him leaning on the gates, staring up at their window as if he was waiting for something unseen to happen. She held in her clothes and sighed. This man will not rest until our child is gone. On stormy night, when the rain was beating against the zinc roof and the wind shook, the windows in began crying louder than ever before. No amount of rocking could calm her. Amina was frantic. She paced the room and bent the baby to sleep to no avail. Then suddenly there was a thud outside, heavy and deliberate footsteps. Before Kanko could react, the door shook violently. Kabaya's voice thundered above the storm. Enough! You think you can define me? I warned you. No babies. Kaku's anger boiled over. He flung the door open and faced the landlord, not minding the rain splashing in. Why, Papa? Why do you hate babies? What did they do to you? Neighbors began to gather despite the rain. Jonas held a lantern. Mama Solange wrapped herself in cloths while Madame Chanta held her frying pan over her head as if it were an umbrella. They crowded around the veranda, eager to see the bottom of the issue. Kabaya stood still. For a moment he looked like he would lash out, but instead his shoulders slumped. He took a step back and shook his head. You want to know why? You really want to know? The compound fell silent except for Serene, and then he raised his trembling hands as if he was confessing to an invisible judge. Years ago in this very house I had a wife. Her name was Malu. She was my sunshine, my everything, and she was carrying our first child, a boy. But on the night she was to deliver right inside that back room, something went wrong. She screamed and bled, and the baby cried once, just once. Before both of them went cold in my arms, my wife died. My son died. And since that day, I have not known peace. Gas rippled through the crowd. Amina felt her own eyes sting with tears. Kabaya continued with a mixture of sorrow and anger. After that, every tenant who brought a killed into this compound. Something tragic would happen. Babies died in their sleep. No sickness, no warning, just silence in the morning. I buried 3 babies with my own hands. 3. Tell me, is that not a curse? Is that not punishment? I cannot watch it again. I cannot bear to hear the cries of children, knowing they might not sleep to see the sun. That is why I said no babies. Not because I hate them, but because I fear for them. I fear death would come again. He sank to his knees right there in the rain and groaned with grief. Do you think I enjoy living alone like a ghost? I made the rule to save others from the pain I carry. But you broke it. The neighbors were stunned into silence. Mama Solange whispered in Zabi. So this is the truth. Jonas shook his head slowly. We thought he was wicked, but he is a man bleeding inside. Amina held her baby tighter. She had hated Kabaya for his cruelty, but now she saw a broken man haunted by tragedy. Still, her mother's instinct screamed. If the cross was real, it meant her daughter was in danger. She turned to Kangu with trembling lips. "We cannot stay here, Kangu. We cannot gamble within his life." Kabaya lifted his wet face and hollow eyes and said, "If you love your child, take her far from this place. This house it does not forgive." The rain continued to pour, as if the heavens themselves mourned with him. And in that moment, every tenant in the compound realized that this was not an ordinary landlord with strange rules. This was a man trapped in the ruins of his past, and his grief had poisoned the walls of the house itself. From that night of the confession, the compound could no longer return to normal. Everyone looked at the landlord differently. Some pitiated him, some feared him, and some rumored that he had caused himself by bearing grief inside his house. But for Konga and Amina, the revelation brought terror. Every cry from baby Inni now felt like a countdown. Amina barely slept. She sat awake, watching her baby's chest rise and fall. Terrified that one morning she would not wake up, she prayed out loud, holding In against her bosom. "Oh God, protect my child. She's innocent. Do not let sorrow touch her." Kangal tried to be strong, but inside he was torn apart. He hated the thought of leaving the flat they had worked so hard to find. Yet he feared the shadow that hung over it. Whenever he left for work, he worried that he might return to find tragedy. He confided in Jonas one evening. "My brother, I don't know what to believe. Is it curse or only fear?" Jonas sighed and said, "Sometimes fear is curse itself. Don't play with it." And then one dreadful night, the fear became real. It was a hot night, the type of night where sweat glued clothes to the skin, and baby In suddenly began to cough. At first it was small, but then her tiny body began to shake violently and her breath grew shallow. Amina screamed, "Kangu! Something is happening to her!" They rushed around in panic, finding her with clothes, trying to feed her milk, but nothing worked. Her lips began to turn pale. Amina collapsed to the floor, crying, "Oh God, no, not my child!" The neighbors rushed into the flat, drawn by the noise. Mama Shoal shouted, "Take her to the hospital." Jonas grabbed his keys, ready to drive them, but Kababaya rushed through the crowd. He fell to his knees beside the baby and wept like a man who had lost everything again. "No, not another one. Please spare this child. Spare her!" He lifted his head, strangling, and began praying aloud, mixing his words with tears. Now the compound, which was usually full of gossip and quarrels, united in desperate prayers. Someone shouted, "Please God." Some called on their ancestors, while some just begged and wept. The entire night became a chorus of pleading voices. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, in its coughing slowed down. Her breathing returned to normal, and color returned to her lips. The room heaved a deep sigh of relief. Amina cried uncontrollably, holding her baby tight and rocking her gently. Kaka dropped to his knees and cried, "Thank you, God, thank you." But when Kababaya saw the child breathing again, he turned away with his shoulders still shaking. "This house will not let her live long. Take her far away. Go before it repeats itself," he said with finality. The following morning, with eyes still swollen from crying, Kangu and Amina made their decision. They packed their belongings into sacks. The neighbors tried to help by giving them small gifts of food and money. Mama Solange hugged Amina tightly. "It is better to lose a house than a child. You'll find another place." Jonas patted Kangu's shoulder. "You are a man. You are not running away. You are only choosing life." As they carried their things to the gate, Kabaya stood watching. He looked like a tree that had been struck by lightning. He was tall but broken inside. He whispered to himself, "Forgive me. I wanted to protect you, but my house is already aggravated." Thank you for watching this story. Kindly share your thoughts about this story with me in the comment section. Give this story a thumbs up and share the story out with your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel if you've not done so by now. Until I bring another story your way, bye.